So let me start that. So for the recording, this has been recorded and this will be shared publicly afterwards, and we're going to stop the recording at the end of the session. So you're welcome to ask any questions throughout, but they will be recorded. If you want to ask questions after the recording's finished or make any comments at that point, also feel free to keep it for then. I'll hand over to Dawn.
Brilliant, thanks Tom. Okay, welcome everyone to the Research and Development Show and Tell for the Improving Local Authority Building Control Alpha. We've reached number 10. So today's show and tell, we are going to actually be thinking about what we've learned throughout the course of the Alpha, and just talking about some of the information that we're starting to form and put into our report. So I'm going to be talking about some of the user insights, and Tom's going to be talking about some principles that we've pulled together. Then we'll hand over to Rianne, and she's going to be talking about some of the data standards work that she's been doing in the last couple of sprints, and then just what's next. Okay, as always, we'll start the show and tell with a recap of our Alpha vision. So to explore, prototype and test solutions that demonstrate how building control can be improved to deliver a better user experience for customers and staff, improve the quality and usefulness of data, and to position local authorities as a service provider of choice. Okay, so some of our outcomes. I popped this in here, don't worry, you do not need to read this. It was just an illustration to show all the thinking that we've been doing as we've come to the end of the Alpha. So thinking about some of the insights and what we've learned and what that means for the future. Tom has kindly put that translated it into a nice slide. So our insights, what we've uncovered during discovery and Alpha, thinking about specifically that full plans journey that we've been focusing on, and then how these insights have influenced our thinking, so how these findings have shaped our designs. And this has helped us to form a set of principles, which Tom is going to be talking about a bit later. And then what the designs are, so the prototyping that we've been doing and what are we going to be doing next. Okay, so user insights, I'm just going to talk through these at a very high level with just some examples just to give you a flavour of what we've found out during the Alpha. Okay, so starting with shadow systems. So these big back office systems such as Uniform, they are being viewed as repositories for final outcomes, so not tools for daily work. Staff are using their parallel unofficial systems, shadow systems, to fill the gaps for their daily workflow. So this could be doing their technical checking, managing just sort of their work, and sometimes actually fulfilling statutory compliance. So this is a quote from a technical support officer, talking about Digit, which is a tool for sewage, doing sewer checks to ensure that consultations occur when sewers are present. So yeah, she says it was a way of fudging Uniform to try and make sense of the KPIs. So they serve a purpose, these systems. They are sticky plasters for a system that doesn't actually fulfill their needs. But these shadow systems, although they help, they are fragmented, and in doing so they cause duplication of information and data and incomplete data, which I'm going to be talking about now. So duplication, this came out a lot during the discovery. The amount of manual intervention that is needed by staff to be moving from information from one place to another to keep that flow of data going. And I think during Alpha, this came out more and more, the granular detail of where this was happening and the impact that it was having. Speaking to one surveyor, he thought that probably about 40% of his day was being used on administrative tasks like duplicating data just to keep that data moving. So it's not only a source of frustration, it can cause errors. It also reduces their capacity. These technical staff that are trained to do the complex work, so much of their time has been spent on these tasks. And this quote really stood out to me. I remember when speaking to this technical support officer, she was talking about the process of sending an email, but she would have to send an email, but then download that text, then upload it onto iDocs to have that record. And then she would also write a case note. So 3 actions just for one task. Incomplete data. So that reliance on these fragmented software, these shadow systems, it creates gaps. It creates these critical blind spots that really stops or hinders that audit trail of information. It limits visibility for staff for knowing what's going on, and also restricts that managerial oversight of performance and how things are going. And it forces teams to operate reactively, having to constantly be problem solving rather than be able to proactively make decisions based on the information they've got. A quote to sum that up. This was speaking to a structural engineer. He had an impressive suite of Excel sheets that he was using to manage his work, tracking, but also doing his work. And he relied on them so much. He knew that if he had his spreadsheets, he knew he could get the information that otherwise he would find quite difficult to find if he was asked for that information. And also thinking about the customers ringing up, trying to make sense of certain things, or, trying to follow up on an application. We spoke to one homeowner who the project had gone wrong. He was trying to pick up where the builder had left off, and he rang up to find out where his final certificate was, only to find that actually the information of the final inspection hadn't been recorded on Uniform, and it meant that it needed another inspection to plug that gap. And while we're on the subject of customers, move on to the last insight I have for you: low legislative knowledge. So homeowners, this is often when they are dealing with building control, this is the first time they've ever spoken to them. This might be their first or only project they're going to be doing. So they have a very limited knowledge and awareness of building control and regulations. So it's likely, because of that, they have hired architects and builders to manage that complexity for them, to help them navigate through that process. But in doing so, they become operationally blind, even though they are legally liable for that build. So when things do go wrong, actually that reassuring sort of safety net that they've had from that architect or builder actually becomes a source of financial risk and anxiety. This was apparent from one of the homeowners we spoke to. Unfortunately for her, the project had gone wrong. The builder had tried to do something that was against building regulations. So the relationship had gone sour. She was taking it over, and she realised when she was trying to put the pieces together that actually she didn't have, her application hadn't been signed off, and also she hadn't had any of the inspections like the builder had said. She had lacked that visibility, knowing what was going on, and then she was left in a situation of very stressful situation, trying to work it out. So yeah, as I say, a high level look at some of the insights there. And now I'm going to hand over to Tom to talk about some of the principles.
Thank you very much, Dawn. So yeah, as Dawn mentioned, these principles build on those insights, and what they are is a sort of helpful way for us thinking about as we start to create solutions or think about how we might design services and systems to really bear in mind those things we found out and sort of set ourselves some guidelines and principles for how we're going to go forwards. So I'm going to look at one of these principles in detail, and then I'm going to skip through the other ones at a slightly higher level. But as we said, these will all be in the final report. We'll share some more detail, I think, at our next show and tell as well on them. But so this is the first principle, which is a whole system for the whole job. So this responds directly to the shadow systems insight that Dawn shared. We know that there's gaps in current software, and this can lead to these sort of unreliable and inconsistent shadow systems that mean that data is fragmented, and it disrupts the workflows. So we know that building control teams need one tool which has everything they need together. The documents there, the records of the work there, and the communication is happening there as well. It's nothing's needing to be moved or recorded twice. So our principle is that we'll create one system which combines a repository, a record of action, and allows work and communication to happen in one place. So it's quite a high level thing. It doesn't describe exactly how we're doing it, but it sets a direction of travel for us. So if we move to the next principle, Dawn. So the second principle is flexible workflows to manage the nuance of construction. And for this, our principle is we're going to create a service that uses consistent component steps. So if you're doing something like sending an email, that will happen in the same way. Or if you're, maybe more likely, if you're communicating with an applicant, that will happen in the same way. All that data will be saved to the system, but you'll be able to use that at the points that you need to throughout the workflow. So It might be checking about a site inspection. It might be trying to get some extra information, but it'd be a recognizable thing that you'll be able to use in the way that you need to fit around the needs of the customer and the inspector. Next slide, please, John. The third principle is a data-led process. So we're going to create a service that's driven by data and not documents. Doesn't mean we're not going to have documents, but it means that we're going to really try and increase the amount of data that's in the system and the usefulness of that data, so that we're less reliant on documents, unless those are for the things that are really maybe better in documents or in visual form. And this will allow information to move much more freely throughout the systems, and hopefully do this in a secure and transparent way as well, or certainly do that in a secure and transparent way. The next principle is requirements as data. So this ties back to the incomplete data insight, and we're going to create requirements as data. So this means that there is an auditability and a connectedness between a requirement, between something that has been noted as not in compliance with regulations, and all the information that that's connected to. So whether that's a drawing, whether that's some information that needs to be provided, whether that's something that needs to be inspected on site, or another form of certification needs to be provided. That's all built in, but at the center of this is this core thread of a requirement that needs to be met, and all the pieces of information that provide evidence for it, or that might initially indicate a contraventions. They're all tied together, and it's really clear both for the inspector and the customer what needs to be done. The first of our 5th principles is visibility and thinking about audits. So I've talked about audits in terms of requirements, but more broadly across this, we know that we need to provide the customers with a customer portal that shows all the customer parties, so the client, the contractor, the designer, details of the application, so they can understand what has, and more importantly, what hasn't yet been done for their application, helping them be very clear on where they are. The second part of this visibility is around roadmaps. Again, this ties to this low legislative knowledge, and we're going to create a customer portal that shows all those customer parties what's needed to be done next, helping them meet all their requirements and get the project delivered sooner, giving them that clear indication of the notices they're going to need to provide, the certification they're going to need to do, the site inspections that are required, etc., and allowing everyone who are responsible or involved in that to easily access that information. So all of those principles we have already been embedding into our prototypes, and I'm not going to list all the bits of the prototype here. I'm just going to talk about one aspect of it, which is the overall architecture of the back office system that we've been talking about, or how the back office system integrates. So we know that we want to bring case and document management together. That was one in our first of our principles, and we also want to bring client communication into there as well. By doing this, we can save time, we can use less tools, we can reduce the risk of information going missing, and we can free up time for officers, and also hopefully for customers as well. So if we have a look at this, so for each of the aspects of the prototype, there'll be some description of it, how it connects to the principles, and there will be either a diagram, there'll be a screen recording, or there might be some screenshots. In this case, it's talking about the architecture, how it's all constructed. And here we provide that overview of showing you, the submission service is where we collect application information, we collect documents, we send those through to the back office aspect where it's all stored, and events and audits are also stored or created. And then we've got this kind of back and forth connection with the customer portal where all that application information is available, those documents are available, and again, events and audits there are visible to them, and they can also provide more documents and provide, undertake events that moves backwards and forwards between that portal and the back office system. We haven't yet completed this, but we're going to be, for each of the bits of the prototype, recording our learnings from testing and how we've iterated it. So what we found out, for example, when we've been testing some of this stuff, and then how we've changed it as a result. And then we're going to list all of the resources for that. So you'll be able to see any sketches, any drawings, any diagrams, any clickable prototypes, any coded prototypes. They're all going to be linked from there. So you'll be able to access those, try those out, share those with people who might be interested. And we're also setting out what we're going to do next for each of them. So in this case, we're creating some bits of the architecture that we haven't yet done, and also in this case really thinking about how we move this from the prototype into what we call a production level of infrastructure. So that is something that, rather than something that's just used for demonstrating and doing some basic testing, somewhere that you can actually reliably put data and be confident that it's secure, be confident that it's going to be stable and consistent, and you're going to be able to access it securely but also easily as well. So those are all things that we're setting out for the next phase, and I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon to talk a bit about the data standards work.
Lovely. Can you move forward, please? So I'm deviating slightly from what Dawn and Tom have presented so far, which is a great scene setting and contextual understanding of the whole project. I just want to kind of narrow my vision to what has been happening in the last sprint as far as data standards goes, because we've made some good progress. So the highlight really was a workshop at Camden where we had great access to a couple of representatives of our BCAs, really kind of focused on a lot of the issues surrounding data, and it was really encouraging to hear the response that they themselves would really welcome a data-driven approach rather than the current approach where they put the data into PDFs that are emailed and then keyed into council systems. They were really positive about the idea of having a consistent data standard through which they could submit data directly via APIs. So that was a really valuable insight. Now, one of the things that we talked about, which I thought was really interesting, is if we look at the regulations, there's obviously a parallel between building notices and initial notices, even though they serve a different purpose. And similarly, certificates of completion and final certificates serve a different purpose, but they contain a lot of the same information. So one of the things that we discussed in the workshop was the idea of having some sort of canonical standard where building notices and initial notices would share a data schema, but sort of containing this overlapping information. So a building notice might not contain exactly the same fields as initial notice, but those fields would be standardized and each notice would contain a subset of these, and similar for certificates. And I've added some examples and some exploratory documentation to the repository just to show the kind of thing I mean. So that's an example of the way we could start thinking about certificates and notices if we were to think about having a single canonical standard to just make life easier for everybody. And that does seem to be something that would be hugely useful in terms of thinking about the purpose of these documents and what's in them. So moving forward. Lovely. Another thing I've done during this sprint is to create a video showing the repository and talking about data standards for building control and why they're so important. We recognise on the project that most of the people who are going to be involved in this are not going to be software developers, so probably they're not, that familiar with looking at GitHub. So the idea of the video was just to walk people through explaining in non-technical terms how the repository works and how they might be able to give feedback on it. So as ever, we have different routes for giving feedback, either directly on GitHub if people already have accounts via a Google form, or as ever by reaching out to us via email, on Slack, or just pinging one of us to have a call about it. Feedback probably is the most important thing for us here. Thank you, Tom. So moving on to what's next for the whole project. We are collectively, as Dawn and Tom have said, working on the final report now. And there's a lot of good stuff in there, including the whole context of all the data standards, why we're doing it, and so on. A big thing for us is preparing for the ODP summer event in Liverpool, and also we are finishing the coded prototype. We're going to be working on we've done a lot of work on the design checks and requirements part, and we're going to be wrapping this up over the next sort of 1 to 2 weeks. And we have another show and tell coming on the 3rd of June, hoping to see everyone there. And finally, I think we can now switch off the recording, because questions and answers, as we traditionally do, are done off camera to allow people to speak freely.